Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians and their ancestors of the unceded lands and waters on which we live, work, and depend. We recognise all First Nations peoples around the world and celebrate their enduring connections to country, and pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. There has been talk for some time about the international humanitarian system being broken, not fit for purpose, and failing to reach those who are most in need. Indeed, the statistics about who we are not reaching are eye-watering, as is frustration around the lack of progress on reform and transformation of the system itself. Our research shows it's not just what the humanitarian system is doing, but also how it conducts its operations that impacts on both short and longer-term outcomes. So what are some of the initiatives that are seeking to shake things up, get better results, and change the status quo? How brave can we be? And how ready are we for change? In this episode, we explore how we can deliver humanitarian response differently. This is I Think You're on Mute, a podcast exploring who's talking and who's listening in a humanitarian emergency and how we can improve humanitarian response for the better. I'm your host, Beth Eggleston. You will have heard the narrative about how it's hard to shift power to local organisations because they lack capacity. But how does that capacity move around? Some of our latest research addresses this question. When an emergency hits and overwhelms the available resources, help arrives from elsewhere, starting with communities supporting each other and continuing with the roles of local responders, national organisations, and, when necessary, international agencies. As these different organisations interact, mobility between them has become increasingly common. The humanitarian sector's push for localisation has resulted in an increasing presence of local and national staff in international organisations. This has many benefits for the sector, but can also bring unintended consequences for local organisations. A range of factors contribute to staff movement in the humanitarian sector. This includes positive opportunities for professional growth, as well as the consequences of innate inequalities in the system that continues to treat national and international staff differently. The nature of humanitarian work requires a certain level of staff mobility. However, current poor recruitment practices have the potential to undermine and erode local capacity. Many of us in the sector have heard the frustrations of staff poaching from organisation to organisation. Our research paper, Respectful Recruitment, explores recruitment in humanitarian organisations and proposes that a fresh approach is needed to encourage the sector to adopt respectful recruitment practices. Respectful recruitment acknowledges ethical and fair processes as a starting point and encourages humanitarians to develop a better understanding of how the sector can more holistically support local organisations facing challenges from the loss of staff. It explores how a combination of collective and context-specific solutions can enable the sector to make progress on these issues and better support local systems. This paper was written by Jessie McCommon, who you heard from in an earlier episode, and the fabulous Kate Sutton, who used to be my co-director. I'm so pleased to welcome Kate back to the podcast to chat about this research. Hello, Kate. Thank you so much for joining us today. How are you?
Hi, Beth. Lovely to be here. I'm well, thanks.
Kate, many of our listeners will know you as you were a co-director at HAG, but would you be able to just introduce yourself briefly to our listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Kate Sutton. I was one of the co-founders along with Beth of Humanitarian Advisory Group about 11 years ago, and now work as an advisor to Humanitarian Advisory Group alongside pursuing other interests as well. It's lovely to be back with the team.
Thank you, Kate. And I appreciate your time today because, as I've just mentioned, you're one of the co-authors of this really interesting report, Respectful Recruitment. So I wanted to start, Kate, with the fact that you've worked in many different humanitarian contexts. Can you paint a bit of a picture for us around how you saw staff movement during that time and some of the impacts of that movement?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you know, Beth, I spent about 10 years working in different country contexts, and very often that was in the aftermath of an emergency situation. So, you'd have lots and lots of international organizations, UN organizations arriving in a particular country context. And that was always fascinating, right? Because you have all these organizations arriving and needing to recruit staff very, very quickly. The situation that you really have is this sort of desire to upscale your operations very, very fast. You need to get staff into your organization fast who can speak the local language, who can engage with communities, who can help you run your programs. And so, really a lot of the first 3 to 6 months of setting up an operation in a new humanitarian context is about recruitment. I think the interesting aspect of that we sort of began to recognize a number of years ago, but are still really struggling to manage is the impact that that has on the system. And I think the impact is really at three levels. So there's obviously, positive and negative impact. So there's impact on the individual, there's impact on the organizations, and there's impact on the ecosystem itself. Just to touch briefly on those three, the individual level, that can be great, right? Like somebody gets a new job, they get new opportunities, they might get trained in areas they previously hadn't been trained in. So it can be a really positive step for individuals being recruited into international organizations or large organizations. The downside of the impact is very often they're on shorter contracts. So they are no longer in permanent roles. They might be on a rolling 3-month contract or 6-month contract, so they don't necessarily have that long-term sustainability role. At the level of the organization, again, for the international organizations, it's great. They get a really good pool of staff. For the national and local organizations, and we can talk a little bit more about this as we go along, but it can have a really damaging impact. They have worked and trained up a staff base for maybe decades, and suddenly their staff all leave and they're left in an emergency situation, trying to respond to emergency situation, trying to keep connections with communities, and all of their staff have left, and they're on this kind of continual recruitment training drive, which can be very draining resource wise. And just briefly, I think at the level of the ecosystem, and this I think is really important, the impact can be that you end up with a really decimated civil society. So the international organizations come in, recruit a lot of national staff into their international organizations, but those civil society organizations or women's organizations that have been there for years and years and have all those established relationships with communities, they have lost all of their staff and all of their operating base, and the civil society sort of begins to crumble as a result. And we kind of have to ask questions about what is the ecosystem that we are leaving behind in the wake of these humanitarian operations.
Thanks so much for painting that picture, Kate. I also was keen to understand from you, what were some of the challenges in researching this area of staff movement and respectful recruitment? Because it can be quite sensitive. How did you handle that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, one of the challenges is that, we all have our kind of ideas around how things should be solved or what's going to work. And I think one of the challenges for this particular piece of research was this understanding that context was everything. Like what was going to be suggested and work in one context is not what was going to work in another context. So we'd go in with these really strong ideas in some senses around like, oh my goodness, wouldn't it be amazing? I mean, my particular thing, as you know, is around paying compensation. So if you recruit a staff member for a local organization, you pay compensation. And it was fascinating because in some contexts we would interview people and they'd say, absolutely not. That would be undermining opportunities for national staff and it would stop them being able to be recruited into positions, and there were other contexts where they thought that could be a great idea. And so it was this sort of process, I think, through the research of learning that it really has to be a context-driven set of solutions to be able to work out how to manage respectful recruitment in each context.
Yeah, you're so right. Context is everything. And finally, Kate, I'm keen to understand from you, what are the key changes that you would like to see international humanitarian organizations make to the way that they manage human resources?
I think there are a number of different steps that can be taken, but I think they all need to happen locally in context. And it all really starts with a conversation between all the actors that are going to engage in humanitarian response. So, the recruitment frenzy doesn't come out of nowhere. We generally know when a humanitarian response is kicking up that that's going to happen. And so I think it's important that all the actors are sitting around the table and discussing what respectful recruitment looks like in that context. Now, that can take a number of forms. It can be contract clauses, which state that international organizations won't poach staff from national organizations and engage in unethical recruitment. It can include things like agreements on notice periods, so that 2 or 3 months' notice will be given. And it can also include those ideas we were talking about earlier in terms of compensation if you recruit a staff member. So I think there's a lot of different steps, but I think it's about everyone getting around the table, agreeing on those steps and agreeing how they will hold each other accountable to those steps. And I think as a sort of overarching piece, maybe, Beth, is this sort of idea that the international community needs to have a little bit more long-term thinking. So rather than just worrying about, how you get through the next 3 to 6 months with your programs and your operations, it's about actually making a bit of a strategic plan about what sort of civil society you want to leave in that country context when you end up exiting the country, in 2 or 3 years' time, and ensuring that your recruitment processes are building the capacity of national civil society, not undermining it.
Thank you so much, Kate. I think these are just, fabulous, very practical steps that agencies can take and, ensure these are embedded in all of their policies and processes. And let's hope this is something that agencies will really pick up and run with. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Beth. Lovely to join you.
We need to improve the way we operate as humanitarian organisations. But how does that impact on the way in which we deliver? Through our research, a reflection from a local actor in the Ukraine demonstrates why. They had seen several smaller organisations simply disappear because of the lack of personnel. Respectful recruitment is essential to walk the talk in relation to locally led humanitarian response. We need to support local capacity and leadership to shift the power to local organisations who are there long after international organisations leave.
This new ERC initiative, Enhancing Resilient Communities, is all about what is happening at the barangay level. It's making sure that the captains of barangay, they are part of the process in the planning, that humanitarian assistance takes into account all of this huge decentralization of the Mandanas Garcia's ruling. And we expect to transform the Philippine case in something that, in some way, it will be the contribution of this country to the whole of the humanitarian community.
That was the UN Resident and Humanitarian Coordinator in the Philippines, Gustavo Gonzalez. He speaks into a new flagship initiative to drive necessary and transformative change, developing original, country or area-based coordination and response solutions. The initiative aims to respond differently with a focus that is centred around accountability to impacted communities, driven by local people's needs and protection risks, and representative of the capacities of affected populations. The flagship initiative has recently kicked off in the Philippines, as well as in Colombia, Niger, and South Sudan. The goal is to develop innovative approaches that can be adapted and expanded in other countries and contexts. It's said to be bold and revolutionary because it puts the power in the hands of crisis-affected communities to shape their own relief efforts. It moves away from traditional humanitarian coordination models and procedures. A post-cluster world. What a revelation. As the Philippines is one of the pilot countries for the ERC flagship initiative, I'm thrilled to chat with Nanette Salvador-Antequisa, who is the founder of EcoWeb, a network of NGOs involved in partnership building and pooling of resources to support peace and development programs. Hi, Nanette. How are you? We're so pleased you were able to join the podcast. Could you please introduce yourself a little bit for our listeners?
Thank you, Beth, for having me here. And yes, thank you also for this opportunity. I'm Nanette, the Executive Director of EcoWeb, and also a member of the HAG Advisory Group, and also the current chair of Alliance for Reform Partnership, and also some networks here in the Philippines called ClearNet.
Thanks, Nanette. We're so pleased you're able to join us because we're really interested in this ERC flagship initiative and to see if it really is the bold and revolutionary idea that's going to bring radical change that many in the humanitarian sector have been calling for. So my first question today for you is really so we can learn about how members of EcoWeb who've been working closely with have been involved in the flagship initiative and how it aims to support local leadership in humanitarian response.
Yeah, for EcoWeb, we have been part in this ERC flagship initiative since its inception in the Philippines. No, we're just happy that the Philippines is part of the four countries for this pilot. And so we are really hopeful though, that this can bring transformative change in the aid system that we have been advocating for so long with local actors in the Philippines and also around the globe. From the inception, our team also on the ground is coordinating and also engaging the ERC team. Yeah, we started the scoping and so we really like hope that this ERC initiative could really like cover and capture the learning as well of the local actors as well as of the communities in the recent and past crises. ERC is now promoting this concept called LDE, the listen, discover, and enhance, which actually for us, it's kind of a concept that also resonates to the advocacy that we are doing as for the past years, the survivor and community-led response to crisis approach. And that first is we really need to listen more to the communities, discover that actually recognize that communities already have and local actors have this capacity and existing capacity, and that usually it's overlooked no in a major crises, major national agencies, and the enhance concept that yes we are also promoting in the concept no, of this appreciative inquiry process that we are like, promoting through the survivor and community led response, and that we hope that yes international actors would really like partner equitably and recognize that there are already these local capacities and that we just need to enhance those. Yes, so yeah, promising concept that the ERC is bringing at the present, and we are actually like engaging, and we really hope that more local voices can be captured in these initiatives. We hope that it can really like initiate change, and then it may again like frustrate local actors for what I have like observed in the current implementation. Yet still like majority of those that have engaged are international actors. Many of them also have nationalized. This is a real challenge that we're also facing. But we really hope that these international AGOs registering themselves as national organization and are actually actively engaging this ERC flagship initiative, we hope that still there would be like a equitable and real meaningful partnership with the local actors, and that the change that they hope to bring through pooled fund, for example, would really like provide more opportunities to the real local actors on the ground and empower communities really to lead their own action. This is an ongoing discussion. And in February, for example, we agreed that they will feature more locally led action on the ground and to capture those experience. And so we hope that we can really influence the concept along the process.
Fantastic. What you've been saying, Nanette, it really resonates, that piece around learning from communities and putting them at the center of humanitarian action. My second question is really around the Philippines specifically. What do you think are some of the characteristics about humanitarian response in the Philippines and your own experience of disasters? What kind of structural challenges will the initiative need to deliver on in order to overcome some of the challenges that you've outlined?
In the Philippines, yeah, of course, we are number one in the World Risk Index. No, the rest it shows actually how challenging, for the Philippines. Every year in and year out, we are actually facing these disaster risks, both natural and human induced. No, so we have major disasters that we have to face. Until now, we are still like responding to Typhoon Rai, Super Typhoon Rai. Was this impact? And after many months of those typhoon Rai, communities again have experienced localized disasters like due to shoreline. And because of being localized, there is not much attention and assistance. And many communities also have to face the protracted crisis. And there are, we have this conflict, and then there is actually this exacerbating impact to communities that have to face multiple crises. So this is really like a condition in our communities that actually, if we really would like to make our actions more impactful, then we really have to do nexus approach, not just like humanitarian. And because in the community, when you go to the community, it's always like not only humanitarian and emergency response, but communities really would like also to initiate resilience actions, in the recovery, in the peace action in conflict affected areas. No, so yeah, that's the nexus action of humanitarian development, peace in many of our communities. But of course, the system, the cluster system, yeah, most of the agencies are actually still not on that concept of nexus. No, so very like a compartmentalized still. So we hope this would really promote the needs of the community, making the people at the center, making their needs, making their capacities also being recognized, no, by the humanitarian actors. But of course, another aspect also that we have to face is the policies, no, and the existing policies of the government. For us, the civil society organizations, we believe, it's the government that is really the main duty bearer, and as thus in the action that we are doing, we should really be engaging, no, the government system, etc. But there is a lot of need for improvement of our policy, especially in its operationalization. Thus, we really see the important role of the civil society in influencing our government system. Also, to make it really like more effective and efficient. So, like for example, for us, like EcoWeb, we go really in not only in implementing actions on the ground, supporting locally led action, community led action, but we also enable communities and people affected to engage the government, no, empower them, and also for us like to engage the government to influence the policies. And that's actually the need for really strengthening and sustaining the role of the local civil society, which has been weakened actually by this in the past, no, by this international system that actually not really complementing. Yeah, that's actually this localization campaign, no, an agenda of the local actors. So yeah, for us, that's why we are saying we really would like to become more effective. We have to see actually these structural blockages as well, and that could be addressed more effectively if we strengthen local organizations. And we really hope that this ERC, which actually bring in this concept also of bringing different stakeholders together to effectively address the needs and impact of crisis in the community and making the people at the center. And so there is this concept of the ERC, like for the CSOs, for the NGOs, the private sector, the international, the national, and the local government to come together. Of course, this is really like a challenge because we're still piloting, but for us, we're already doing something on that on the ground. We are even partnering with local government units to pilot also to see how locally led action could be done together, community led action to be done together. So we have done that and demonstrated, and hope that the ARC can actually capture those stories not only from ECOWA but many of the local organizations that are already doing something on the ground. But yes, so much challenges with all this crisis that we have to face, and we have to also inform ourselves that there's like protracted crisis in the Philippines, and many of them have become forgotten crises. Now we have to prepare again for another new crisis. So the condition in the Philippines, that's multifaceted, yeah, and of course locally led action. That's what we really hope that the ARC can bring in the current initiatives that we are doing. I think another challenge that we are facing here, Beth, is this funding availability for the ARC. No, we're told that the funding that we are hoping to really support this initiative is not yet there, and that there is hope that more donors will support for the implementation of the plan for this ARC on the ground. We need like a multi-year funding and flexible funding that is accessible to local actors to initiate a real community led and local led action that would really address the real needs of the communities as like identified by them, and also enable people and communities to lead the process on the ground, for them to be part of the decision making process. And it will not happen if the funding modality that will be provided is the same as usual that had been there in the humanitarian sector.
Yes, I think what you've been saying about the nexus and that piece around how we can see systemic change, it's just so important. So I'd also like to bring it to the personal a little bit, Nanette. I mean, you've experienced many disasters yourself in the Philippines. What are your personal hopes for this flagship initiative and what you'd like to see it achieve?
Yeah, I've been in this work, Beth, for 30 years. So, yes, I've been humanitarian and development, and personally, when I hear this pilot initiative, I really got excited. Although I heard a lot of pessimism in the sector, because we know that even though like some are skeptic in that if there is really this hope that that the UN system can change because it's a huge system. But of course we know and we see that the important role that UN can actually bring in, and that to change the humanitarian system. And so, of course, like in the Philippines, we have the HCT, and we actually like see that this is really very dominated by international actors. With this new concept, we really hope that it can change. In fact, for example, the Philippine INGO network before they changed their name now. They now become like the Philippine Inclusive NGO Network. So this is the kind of changes that is happening at the moment. Actually, one of our major partner before, international NGO, that we really like had given feedback to, that it's not really bringing the equitable partnership that we are like hoping, or the community-led approach that we are hoping through that engagement. So it was not happening. Now they are saying that they are now into this a strategic programmatic partnership model that they would like to develop with us, because they have committed already in the international grand bargain process, and they're also active in this ERC initiative. So yes, there is some glimpse of hope in changes in the system, but of course it really takes leadership in the UN resident coordinator. And I've seen actually like a lot of promising statement. I was actually like invited to also like provide my inputs in a panel discussion at the global level about the ERC. I told them, being there as a local actor and being heard by the global OCHA and the global UN agencies about my experience and insights, it's a big deal for us, because it means also that they are really like open to listen to our perspective and our hopes. And we really hope that all those recommendations that we made, as we actually like stressed in 2021, we initiated this localization dialogue process together with OCHA and with for EP and Oxfam in the Philippines. And it was a long process. And I said, so many recommendations were already made by the communities affected of crisis, by the local and national CSOs and NGOs in the sector. And we really hope that those specific recommendations will be taken into consideration by the ERC along the process of its implementation seriously. And I think there is a specific action that they are doing right now. OCHA is really leading the process of making other UN agencies understand this new concept of ERC flagship. But we know that this transformative change process that they are aiming can only happen if all stakeholders will really do their piece. It will bring some transformative change in the aid system, the system that would really make the people at the center of aid, but also ensuring that the role of the organic civil society organization, the local national organization, should be strengthened in the process and not actually like weakened by the international agencies that also like we know would like to sustain themselves. That's why they nationalize because of this localization agenda that are being responded to now positively by a number of donors. So that's it. A lot of hopes, Beth, but I really see the important role of all stakeholders in make it happen. And of course, the strong national and local civil society organization, because it is still very minimal, the voice of locals in the ARC discussion.
Thank you so much, Nanette. We're so looking forward to following the journey of the ERC flagship initiative in the Philippines and learning more from you over the next year or so about what actually gets implemented and how change is going to come about. So thank you so much for your time today. It's been such a pleasure to hear from you and to learn all that's happening in this area in the Philippines. So thank you so much.
You're welcome, Beth, and thank you very much as well.
With these initiatives, Australia's new international development policy and the soon-to-be released humanitarian strategy, there's much work happening to deliver differently and enhance the system that aims to alleviate suffering and save lives. Through respectful recruitment practices, The sector can better support local organisations to lead on the local humanitarian agenda and ensure affected communities are at the heart of humanitarian response. This is the last episode for this season. Thank you so much for joining me. Stay tuned for Season 3 though. There'll be new insights with new voices. I'm Beth Eggleston, and this is I Think You're on Mute. This podcast is supported by the Australian Government through the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. The views expressed are the presenters alone and are not necessarily the views of the Australian Government. This podcast was produced and recorded by Room 3, a production company that works with not-for-profits and social enterprises, and supported by Green Letter Communications.